Great. Let's get started. Good afternoon. Welcome back. I hope that you've had a good weekend. We are now in week 4, so we're moving right along. We have a new set of theories to cover this week, and this week is the last set of new theories before the first application paper. But we'll be talking about a little bit more today, but these 3 theories are the last choices to include for that assignment. So we'll be going over these, talking about spiral of silence theory. We also have Riley doing our first class presentation of the term. So we'll hear from Riley in just a minute. So just as a reminder, the schedule is here. So on Wednesday, we'll hear from Presley on uses and gratification. And then on Friday, from Angelin with basic negotiation theory. So last class, we talked about agenda setting theory. Again, this is the theory that suggested that media had power to define issues, topics that we deemed especially important and worth talking about. We talked about the balloon boy hoax as an example of that. And we utilized agenda setting theory to look at some of the major headlines and topics discussed in the context of the news. So one term we talked about last class is related to the importance of a topic relative to other topics. Is there anybody who'd like to take a stab at that and see who can get this one right first? Yes, yes. So salience refers to an importance of a topic relative to another. An example of that we used last class was talking about coverage of COVID-19 relative to coverage of Russia and Ukraine. We've seen much more media coverage of Russia, Ukraine, and much less of COVID-19 overall. And the frequency with which information is shared and discussed through news headlines online is a way that we're able to garner for ourselves how important we should see a particular topic or issue, according to agenda setting theory at least. So for today, after we hear from our presentation, we'll be talking a little bit about the first application paper assignment. It's not due until 3 weeks from now at the end of week 6. But I do want to give you some extra time to really think out and plan this assignment so that you know what to expect and what I'm looking for. And then we'll be talking a little bit more about spiral of silence theory. I also wanted to note one adjustment. So if you look on the calendar for the course under week 6, you'll notice that the Friday before your first application paper is due, I've blocked that out as an attendance optional day, where you could come in and talk with me and use that, or you could choose to just stay home or get some additional work done on the assignment. I'm needing to make an adjustment to switch this so that while you're welcome to use that time slot to meet with me, I'm unfortunately only going to be available virtually during that time. So you can use my Zoom office on May 6th to ask questions, to chat with me, or to use email. But rather than being in the room on that date, I will be available virtually. So just to let you know about that change. It's still an attendance optional day, still an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you need, but I'm just asking you to use the office hour link to do so in a virtual capacity. I do want to give you a few reminders related to the course and just sort of where we're at this stage in the term. So yesterday, the annotated bibliography assignment was due. I've received that assignment from several of you. Thank you for doing that. I'll be working through that this week to give you your grades and feedback on that assignment. As a reminder, for those of you that have not turned that in and haven't been in touch with me yet, it's -5% for each day the assignment is late. So please make sure that you have turned that in as soon as possible. If it's an excuse, Remember that if you need any help on completing this or other assignments, you're welcome to get in touch with me, send me a draft, or email me on anything related to citations or other help. I do my best to answer emails as quickly as I can, but it's better to get in touch with me on business days since my email access is a little bit more sporadic on the weekends. As a reminder, if you have received a Zoom link to join remotely, you're welcome to do that. Just make sure that in order to receive credit for that date, that you've completed the course prompts that I ask folks to do face-to-face as well. If you're not able to do that immediately, we need to turn in those prompts later. You're welcome to do so, but just make sure that you are completing those as well so that I can mark you for attendance if you're joining through Zoom. And then just as a reminder, right, if you need an extension on an assignment, I am asking you to reach out to me, ideally at least a week in advance, unless there's something like a major emergency or issue that has come up. If you know, for instance, that you have an exam or something else that's happening, or that it's just a really busy weekend for you, I recommend just asking for that extension earlier. There were some cases in which people had need for an extension like day of or right before. And while I'm willing to provide that in kind of extenuating circumstances, please make sure that you're giving that advance notice if you're doing an extension rather than doing that day of. So with that being said, before we start on our presentation for today, does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about last class, anything about the course in general at this stage? All right. In that case, we will turn it over to Riley. Riley, I have your slides all pulled up and ready to go. You are welcome to use, there's the board here. You're welcome to either click or use arrows as we're moving between that. I will also give you time signals. So out of the maximum of 6 minutes, this is when you have 2 minutes remaining. This is when you have 1. And then I'll raise a fist when you're at time. So just resituate myself. And should be good to go. Are you ready?
So my name is Riley, and I was given the spiral science theory. So here's why I chose it. It's pretty much sounded cool. Kind of like Harry Potter movie. So I don't know. I didn't really know anything about it. But so what is spiral science theory? Spiral science theory states that we are more likely to remain silent about our opinion if we believe that the perceived majority opinion is different than ours. So pretty much meaning like in a group, and like you're talking about like something, you know, and like you don't really agree with them, but they're all like agreeing with each other, then like you're most likely to like just like stay out of the conversation, not say anything, then share your different opinion with them. And so pretty much here's the model. So it kind of shows that like your place right here, over time, you like slowly just go down the spiral, and over time just go faster and faster until you don't say anything at all. So I have a question. So have you ever felt like you couldn't express your opinion because of the fear of being isolated or your fear of your opinion not being as popular? So I don't have to say anything, like don't raise your hand or anything, but just like think about over time. I'll come back to it. But like I feel like, well, me personally, I definitely have felt that before. But like I just don't really want to like, say anything because I feel like my opinion wouldn't be very, popular among my friends or something like that. So here's some examples that I have. So like pretty easy ones, probably like more like what's it called, political debates. Is like when I was researching it, a lot of like political debates came up as examples. And so like presidential elections, like if you like one candidate that isn't popular in your society, like your social view, or like your friends and groups, you most likely won't like what's it called, like you won't like talk about it because they're different, you know. So then also another one's like a fun one that like I kind of like is like who's the GOAT of basketball? It's like greatest of all time. So like a lot of people think it's like LeBron James. A lot of people think it's like Michael Jordan. And like say like your group of friends think it's Michael Jordan, but you think it's LeBron James. You most likely, as this theory states, you most likely won't like talk about LeBron James, or you most likely like just like say it's Michael Jordan, even though deep down inside you do think it's LeBron James because you don't want to have you have like that fear of being unpopular, isolated. Like another one's like being vaccinated is a pretty a controversial topic that a lot of people like don't want to talk about, and like or like really any political topic or anything that needs an opinion, like period. So why does this theory matter in today's world? This theory shows how people think in everyday world, and shows the majority can change someone's thinking and overall opinion. Maybe not your overall opinion, but you like the LeBron James and Michael Jordan topic. You'd be like, your friends are talking about how good Michael Jordan is, but you think it's LeBron James. But in this theory, it says like you don't want to top out and like say it's LeBron James, so you might agree with them, even though deep down inside you think it's LeBron. You know. Also, this power that social media has in today's world, I feel like it social media is a pretty popular thing. Like if you're like a celebrity says something, and like a lot of people might agree with that person, and then like create more of a what's it called, more like people against you. So, and then the influence that people have on your opinions. There's like the example, like it could change your opinion because they're out to get you, I guess. They're like, it's kind of hard to explain in my head. I'm gonna always go back to Michael Jordan because that's almost familiar with because I'm a basketball player. But like LeBron, so like Michael Jordan is the most popular, but you like LeBron James, and then you're gonna agree with them because you don't have like that argument or you don't have that fear of isolation between your friends. He's like, oh, you like LeBron James, that's weird, you know? So that's pretty much why I think it's pretty interesting in today's world. So I feel like social media has a really big effect. And so, yeah, I think 2 minutes. Really fast.
So between 4 to 6, so you were just at 4.
I was just at 4. Okay.
Perfect.
That's all.
All right. Awesome. All right. Great work, Riley. Awesome job getting us started as our first presentation. And we'll, for basically every class from here on out, hear from at least one person who will start with one of these as a way to get us started and get us thinking about the theory, again, answering that question of why is this theory relevant or significant to our own lives. I thought that Riley did a great job here of defining and explaining the significance of spiral of silence theory. I like the use of some of the sports examples, right, of cases in which we find ourselves in situations where people might have different views than us, and we might not necessarily feel comfortable expressing those views. Thinking about it as it relates to contemporary applications to thinking about COVID-19, social and political topics, and a lot of topics that just feel a little bit heated and challenging for us to openly discuss are examples of spiral of silence theory in action. So I thought that was a really good way to get us starting to think about and utilize this theory in our own lives and engagement with media. So we'll look a little bit more about this, but I do want to take some time to talk about the first application paper that's due 3 weeks from today on May 8th. So the way that this course is set up after the annotated bibliography, you have 2 papers, right? One of them will cover some of the earlier theories from the course. You can choose one of those theories. The second application paper, you can choose a theory from some of the later ones that we'll talk about in the class. And then you get to choose one of those 2 papers to expand and revise into a final submission that you'll turn in at the end of the term. We are not going to have a formal meeting in class on finals week or anything like that. You'll instead be turning in that final paper to Canvas that incorporates that provision. So the first application paper that I'm asking you to do covers the theories that we've talked about in the first 4 weeks of the term. So again, this week is the last set of theories that we'll talk about. And what I'm asking you to do with these theories is to pick an artifact or a piece of communication that you are choosing to analyze or to explain using that theory. And if what an artifact or an example is a little bit unclear, think about each of the examples that I've used to discuss each of these theories in class. For instance, we've talked about examples from film or TV shows. We talked about a media case study last Friday with the Balloon Boy hoax, right? Today, we'll be talking about deaf culture and a discussion of cochlear implants. So those are all examples of the types of artifacts that you could choose to analyze for your assignment in the class, right? An artifact could be an episode of a TV show. I recommend just choosing one episode rather than the entire show because from my experience, if you pick the entire show, you're both biting off more than you can chew, and oftentimes the analysis isn't as developed. You could also pick a film, right? There's a lot of film that's out, interesting, that shows us applications and examples. We talked, for instance, about inside out and symbolic interaction theory. There's a lot of examples, either live action or animated, a film that you could look at. A case study or historical example, again, mediated example we talked about on Friday with Balloon Boy was an example of using historical context to analyze and use theory. What I really recommend, though, is avoiding the use of like a personal example. For instance, I use symbolic interaction theory in my conversations with a friend. While that might be true, and I'm glad that you're thinking about theory in that way, the problem is that there's no way for an outside person to verify that example, right? Using an example that's publicly available, like something like a public speech or address or something like a piece of media, is something that we ourselves as readers can see, so that we can see the work that you're doing rather than us sort of only getting from you what that source is. So I definitely recommend using real life examples that are not personal ones. Advertisements, songs, essentially, if it is something that is communicated and you can define what that piece of communication is, it is a good candidate for this assignment. If you find yourself a little bit unsure of whether or not a topic fits under an artifact for this assignment, I'm happy to chat with you more about it. And we'll also be doing a couple prompts this week that'll help you to start to brainstorm and think about something that works for you. My advice is, as you're working through these theories and thinking through the theories, if there's one that stood out to you, or there's an example you can think of where you say, wow, that really connects well to this theory, that really helps us to think about this theory in action, that's something you can definitely run with this assignment. I also wanted to show you on Canvas the assignment, including the rubric, so that you know what to look for and how I'll be grading this assignment. So if you scroll down to week number 6, you'll see that application paper number 1 is there. Also listed are the theories that you can use for the assignment. So again, these were week 2 theories. These were theories from last week. And then these 3 are the theories that we're discussing this week. This is 150 points, or 15% of your grade. What I'm looking for, first of all, in structure, it's 3 to 4 pages in length, double spaced, clear introduction, conclusion, and body. I recommend being around a half a page or so double spaced for each of your paragraphs, give or take, and just making sure that you have that clear use of topic sentences and structure. Also, right, I have a little bit here about the expectations that you need to look back to that. Style and conventions, right? So I am asking you to use full in-text and works cited in either MLA, APA, or Chicago, just like for the annotated bibliography. Make sure you're giving yourself a look to prevent spelling or grammar mistakes. One thing that I really recommend, if you've taken a class with me before, I've recommended this method, is to give yourself 24 hours before you turn it in. Maybe print out a paper copy too. Come back to the assignment with a fresh pair of eyes and use that. And you'll notice that you can much more easily identify any spelling or grammar errors. When you go over it over and over as you're writing, you're less likely to find them. Choosing a clear and well-defined communication artifact and using examples from that artifact that really connect to your theory, right? So if you're using a TV show, for instance, I would recommend quoting lines of dialogue or particular scenes or examples. If you're quoting something like a public speech, right, you might quote passages from that speech. If you're looking at an ad campaign, right, you could even include an image of that ad and show us visually how that ad is being represented, right? So really make sure that you're getting into the examples within that artifact or piece of communication and drawing from those well. And then lastly, biggest part that I'm looking for is a good application and mastery of theory, right? What helps kind of the difference between an A or a B paper on this assignment, right, is not only that you are understanding and using the theory, but that you're also picking out concepts or ideas within the theory that connect well and show us how this theory works, right? So for instance, you could say agenda setting theory. Look, in this article from The Onion, they set the agenda because there was this false story about a country being bombed that people took as fact, right? What you could do kind of as the next step is say, yes, that's agenda setting theory. This brings forward the idea of priming, right? That based on our past understanding of current events, we were primed to believe that this bombing actually occurred, showing us that we were teed up based on previous media for that event to happen, right? We talked in the class about how concepts or specific details or ideas within a theory are essentially those building blocks that let that theory function. So using those concepts within the theory is something that I'm really looking for here. You know, really show us a theory that you know well and that you can use in specific terms. So those are the 4 things that I'm looking at. All adds up to 150 points, and I'll be grading based on that rubric for the assignment. Any questions on this paper? Again, it's not due for 3 weeks, but I wanted to give you the chance to start thinking about and looking at possible things to analyze in this assignment. All right. So with that being said, using Riley's introduction and exploration of spiral of silence theory, I want to get into a little bit more about this theory, its expectations, and ways that this theory can be used. So spiral of silence theory is this idea that media has a significant impact on public opinion. Similar to agenda setting theory, we're looking at a mass media approach. And it's the idea that mass in social media has immense power to silence minority opinions on issues and to encourage conformity of beliefs on various topics. Though there are times in which somebody, such as a silent majority, could rise up or critique what might be expressed, right? One example of this is that if you find yourself, engaged in social media and you find tons of people are enjoying a song on YouTube and you decide to say, hey, I don't like this, right? Here's the dislike. There's a good chance that people are going to have strong opinions and critique you, right? Oftentimes we see in examples of media, if there's something that's widely praised or widely disliked, if somebody has an opinion that they disagree with, it's not just that they're critiqued for that opinion, but that they're less likely to express that opinion because they know in advance that they might be critiqued or receive a negative response for doing so. In doing that, right, it creates an illusion of uniform thinking that we think everybody agrees with us because people who disagree have not expressed or shared their disagreement. This ties together to the idea of self-censorship in groupthink. If you've taken a class like conflict management or talked about small group communication, you know that groupthink is the idea that when you're in a cluster or group of people, that oftentimes people will self-censor because they want to appeal to the interests of the group. They don't want to rock the boat or share an idea that they think other people will disagree with. And by not sharing that opinion, people in the group start to think that everybody is on the same page and agrees. And ultimately, the group is hurt because that differing perspective isn't brought to the table and people can't openly communicate and share their disagreement. So spiral of silence theory is an important way for us to think about this illusion of uniformity. And we can think about this as a cyberkinetic and social cultural theory. This is a theory that really gets at how we engage with misunderstanding or misinformation, right? Cybernetic is very much focused on the role of noise or how we misinterpret or misunderstand messages. Thinking that people agree with us on a topic would be an example of creating misinformation through communication. A few key terms and things to know here about defining and exploring spiral of silence theory, right? One of the ideas here is that if something is public, right, it's viewable by a large group of people. That's pretty straightforward. If we think about, for instance, posting something publicly to social media, we're sharing that to a larger audience rather than posting something that's more exclusive to friends or close family members. Although we know, right, in the era of the internet, that nothing ever gets deleted from the internet. So something that could be intended for a smaller audience does circulate more widely to a public. An opinion, right, refers to an expressed viewpoint or idea on an issue, right? So Riley's question of who's the GOAT, right, is an example of an opinion that might be shared or given. We've seen a lot of discussion about takes or hot takes on the internet, right? That's an example of an expressed opinion or of expressing a controversial opinion for the sake of a reaction or attention in doing so. And then a public opinion, right, is an example of openly expressing and sharing your viewpoints. So there's a good chance you've heard of public opinion surveys or polls. For instance, there's polls surrounding opinions of Russia, European Union, China, and the United States that differ depending on the citizens of a relevant country, right? Public opinion, including public and opinion polls like approval polls of presidents, are examples of how somebody might choose to share and articulate their perspective on a topic. And this theory assumes that we're very much motivated to follow and adhere to what we consider to be the public opinion. Or at the very least, if we see public opinion trending against our actual perspective, we might choose to change our own view. One example of this is thinking about being a fair weather fan, right? If you're into sports, fair weather fan is the type of person who enjoys a team if it's popular and doing well, but kind of abandons and supports a different team if the team that you originally supported is not doing so well. That could be an example of changing to conformity. So spiral of silence brings about a few assumptions. Again, these theories are the sort of guiding lenses of how we interpret behavior. The idea here is, first of all, that society will threaten people who deviate or disagree with the perspective on a topic with isolation, and that the fear of isolation is a pervasive and pretty universally shared phenomenon. The idea here being that if we express a controversial view or opinion or outside of the majority opinion on an issue, that oftentimes we are left out, we're isolated, we don't feel included, and in so doing, we're not able to fulfill our core human needs. If our desire for belonging and human connection is important to us, then we would be really concerned about being isolated by other people, right? Or we might talk about this as being cut off by friends or family members or other people with whom we disagree, right? We've seen a lot of sort of political disagreement that has happened in recent years as examples of the sort of isolation that we at times experience. As a result of this fear, right, as a result of wanting to be in with and have good connections and relationships to those close to us, and to be generally liked by other people, we might oftentimes gauge our opinions and perspectives at all times. As a result, right, if you're posting something to social media, if you're sharing an opinion or perspective on a topic, right, then you might think ahead of time about how you sharing that opinion could impact people around you. If you went to go see a movie, you and your friends had just seen the newest Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and your friends were like, "Oh, this is so cool, it's so fun," and you didn't really like it, you might choose not to share or say, "Oh yeah, it's great," because disagreeing with your friends could cause them to be a little bit confused or reactive. Public behavior, then, is affected by public opinion assessment, right? So, in other words, we look at the overall public opinion on topics or issues and use that to gauge how we behave on things, right? We're less likely to show ourselves as publicly supportive of something if we know that other people dislike it. So again, you might think about, for instance, something like a Rotten Tomatoes score for a film, and you could choose to speak negatively about that film if you know that it got a bad score and people didn't enjoy it, right? So this is an example of how we'll use spiral of silence theory. Spiral of silence theory does not necessarily mean that our opinion changes, just that our comfort in expressing or sharing that opinion changes. So one thing to think about, right, has been the change in news and how news has been represented and covered. 9/11, we did not necessarily have online televised news circulating on a regular basis. In fact, a lot of the way that we got news through television was defined to specific time intervals. But there were just times in the day where there wasn't news coverage of an event or issue. But 9/11, right, and the sort of significant social, political, and cultural discussions surrounding it brought forth what we now refer to as the 24-hour news cycle. The idea that online and mediated news coverage never really stops. It's always going. While the cycle itself has its ups and downs week to week, in fact, strategically, a lot of people will choose to provide information. For instance, a major update, like if a president is naming a Supreme Court justice, they'll oftentimes time it in a strategic way that corresponds to the start of the news cycle. But we did not see news covered and always on in the same way anymore. Of course, with the internet, we see that happening all the time too. We're always plugged in. That refers to the idea of ubiquity, right? That our access to news and online information is now very ubiquitous. We receive it all the time. It always has this pervasive and prominent role. Again, if you're like me, you always get these like Apple News updates that are just random headlines and other information. And even if we find ourselves not very interested in checking the news or information, we still receive a lot of regular updates and discussion as it relates to these issues. Cumulativeness, right, or repetition is kind of similar to what we talked about last class with the relevance of a topic being based on how often it's repeated and talked about. If we see that a particular news story or issue is being talked about over and over and over again, we understand that that topic or issue is particularly important, especially if public opinion is related to that issue too. If, for instance, a movie came out and it has been like absolutely dragged by your friends, they went to go see it, they said it was terrible, right? That repetition is going to impact how we feel. And then the third idea here is consonance, the idea of whether or not media compares to our own viewpoints on an issue. We talked last class about how things like political polarization oftentimes mean that we are receiving and choosing media sources that oftentimes conform to our own perspectives. And so the degree of consonance that we feel between how we view a topic and how media is covering that topic is referring to this idea of consonance. There's also the importance of opinions and perspectives as it relates to different topics, right? And the idea here being that there are a range of different topics and their significance and importance to our everyday lives that we can consider. One thing that's, I think, useful to think about is an idea of a hardcore perspective, right? A hardcore perspective you can think about as a hill you're willing to die on, or a topic that is so important or significant, or you have such a strong opinion about that no matter what, right, no matter what opposition or disagreement you have from a larger number of people, you will still continue to believe that, right? So you'll still continue to believe that perspective, even if other people disagree, and you're willing to fight for that or fight for that view, even though you don't necessarily think that it's popular. For instance, my hardcore view is that Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek series and that the more recent Star Trek movies are very good, right? It's an example of a hardcore perspective that you're unwilling to change your view on over time. Enduring views refer to views or opinions on topics that are really regularly discussed and are regular sources of disagreement, right? In the United States, one example of enduring views has been surrounding abortion, right? Abortion has been a topic that has been discussed in the United States for decades. It is a topic that we still continue to see discussed in the context of state policy and regulation. It is an enduring topic because it's one that has continued to be talked about historically for a very long time and does not appear to be going away as a topic of disagreement or discussion, right? What that then means is that spiral of silence and whether we choose to share our perspective on that topic is going to be a very constantly relevant thing, right? The topic of guns in the United States would also be an example of an enduring view. It's a topic or issue that has remained relevant for a very long time. Enduring views are one thing, but emerging views are topics that don't have a whole lot of history or context behind them, but are now very important, right? So for instance, the role of Bitcoin, right, or cryptocurrency is an example of an emerging view. It's a topic that is a lot newer, but one thing that spiral of silence theory suggests is that we draw from our understanding on other topics or issues, how we might feel about one topic, how we might expect other people to feel, and use that to dictate our perspectives on this one, right? So given what we know about what our friends think about other things, maybe we know that they feel like cryptocurrency should be something free with little regulation because of how they talk about other issues. And then lastly, there's this idea of transitory use. You could think about this as kind of like your perennial or seasonal topic, right? So these are topics that are not necessarily regularly discussed, but there are specific intervals or times in which those topics or issues become important. For instance, it seems like every major election year in the United States, when the election rolls around, there's discussion about whether or not we should keep or remove the Electoral College, right? Where different states add up to make the number of points that somebody needs in order to win presidential election, right? That discussion of whether or not that's a good policy or a good way to evaluate a candidate seems to come up every single time. But it generally only really comes up around election cycles where that topic becomes relevant. That'd be an example of a transitory view, right? So oftentimes, under spiral of silence, we might be more motivated to think about how we choose to share our perspectives on transitory views based on the relevance of those things. People are going to be less concerned or less willing to socially ostracize you if you're sharing a perspective on a topic when it's not sort of in vogue in that moment. So this theory, spiral of silence, has also been critiqued, right? And some of the critique and usage of spiral of silence theory is contingent on a few different factors. One of them is an issue of logical consistency, right? That there are some issues with how this theory presents itself and puts itself together. One of them being what motivates us to think about or establish a view on a particular topic. This theory suggests that conformity and our comfort in sharing a disagreeing view is a really motivating factor, right? It's this idea that we're very much driven by a fear of isolation. However, we've seen that that's not or not necessarily agreed upon viewpoints are able to receive attention or feedback for doing so, right? The usage of a hot take or controversial opinion is able to get attention. So that's an example of how spiral of silence might not necessarily be applied or used in the same way. Another thing to think about is its lack of specificity, right? This fear of isolation, this desire to create conformity is not necessarily super explicit or well-defined in the same way as other theories that we've talked about. It might make it a little bit more difficult to measure. For instance, maybe spiral of silence theory makes more sense when we think about media intended for a large public audience. One thing to think about is that we get news and information from a lot of different sources. For instance, particular outlets like local outlets like Oregon Live or the Oregonian versus more national outlets to receive information. And then lastly, another thing to think about, this theory doesn't really engage with all that much, is the role of culture, right? Depending on the culture and sort of the spectrum that the culture runs, including factors like individualism versus collectivism, that can dictate the degree to which people have comfort in sharing disagreeing viewpoints. For instance, in more collectivist cultures, including South Korea or Japan, right, there generally is a lot more focus on creating harmony or agreement between people in a group. There's much less desire to share a viewpoint that we disagree with. Whereas in the United States, there's a greater emphasis on individualism and therefore on more open disagreement on topics, meaning that sort of the usage of this theory can differ depending on the culture or situation in which somebody is or is not comfortable to share an opinion that they disagree with. So as an example here, I want to talk about a little bit regarding the topic of deaf culture and cochlear implants. So one kind of interesting area of discussion has been an area that has impacted deaf communities surrounding the use of a cochlear implant, which is a device that oftentimes is able to significantly improve hearing and means that people who often are deaf or hard of hearing are able to hear, right? For a lot of people that are not deaf or don't have experience running deaf issues, that seems like a pretty obvious decision. Yeah, we get the implant. However, there are members of the deaf community who feel strongly against receiving cochlear implants for themselves because they feel like cochlear implants reduce the number of deaf people there are and therefore are hurtful to deaf culture and pose a threat to the access to resources and support among members of the deaf community and might personally choose not to receive an implant for themselves, right? In deaf culture, for instance, there are examples of various practices and behavior, such as eye contact, an introduction, the use of pointing, the use of talking with your mouth full, that are examples of things that might be different, right? So spiral silence theory is at play here insofar as how members of the deaf community might not feel comfortable expressing or sharing their perspective on cochlear implants because they perceive that this perspective is outside of the majority opinion on the topic. That the majority of people see cochlear implants as a good thing, and therefore the members of the deaf community should do that. So I want to share a brief video talking a little bit more about this topic and perspectives surrounding this issue.
Hospitals today will give you paperwork, says, okay, here's an option, cochlear implant, here's another option. But really, they don't go into depth, talk about the benefits of American Sign Language, all the different options that are available that you can provide to your child, whether you can even explore them or even Google them. And there is still a great deal of pressure that people should explore the option of cochlear implants because that's better than signing, that you shouldn't sign. I would say to these people, who are you to decide for us and how to define ourselves as people who are deaf? So that's why I think we need to have a discussion among educational professionals who only see deaf people as black and white. Bring in deaf people, bring in the viewpoints to those who have newly born children who are deaf. People ask me, so Marley, would you have a cochlear implant? And I would say no. That brings a question when you mentioned and talked about at the beginning of the program.
So the example here shared by Marley is an example of sharing a hardcore viewpoint, right? Marley feeling very strongly that she would not choose an implant for herself, and also kind of raising that question about decision-making surrounding that topic, right? So it's an example of choosing to share a viewpoint that the majority of people might not hold on the topic, and being willing to sort of hold ground on that topic as an example of a hardcore view or perspective. So what I want to do now is give you some time in small groups to think about this theory a little bit more. And what I'd like each group to do is to think about an example of these different views, enduring, emerging, and transitory, and then to think about how spiral of silence theory might explain how different views on these topics might be discussed. So I shared examples of each of these in class, and I'll encourage you to come up with some examples as well. Have one person that will write or type for your group. So let's do a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over here. Let's do a group of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 over here in the middle. Let's do a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over here on this side. So take some time to share and talk about that. Have one person write or type for your group.
It's like a historical park. Like something that's been around for a long time.
I don't know, because we were put in time for people to let it happen.
Yeah.
It's true. Or like
I know it's really some of the forward. But there's always been arguments about free speech. In the past, there's been presidents try to shut down newspapers like John Adams.
Which one?
I guess.
It's kind of like so much,
How regulated stock market is and GameStop short squeeze a year ago. That was pretty good news. I thought of the arguments around like Thanksgiving. Like Thanksgiving is just like this colonialist versus like colonialist holiday. Merry Christmas is holiday. Yeah.
Oh, John Hart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that comes up like every Christmas or holiday.
That's true.
Whether it's Christmas or
Every Christmas movie, my family, or Christmas, my dad and I are
it's a Christmas movie.
It is.
Yeah, it ends the beginning of. It ends December 6th.
It's time and week does, but
Yeah, but it always ends December 6th. So it doesn't really coincide.
Yeah, but still, it is like a
yeah. No,
Take another minute or so to share and have a person in each group who has your names.
Barely from the Lord.
Majority of like if majority disagrees with you,
Most people are happy.
not
It's very good. Yeah. But then if you're like, maybe Ukraine's not that good. Maybe Ukraine's not that good.
So go ahead and wrap up your discussion.
Within a really Christian era, there might be lessons in mind on but if you move to like early summer, there's not a lot of people you might be say happy holidays.
So
I heard it's not like there's a Palestinian man. I want a hardcore.
So I was hearing some good examples here of some of these different topics. For example, whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie, or whether or not we should change daylight savings time, right? Or discussion about Russia and Ukraine as sort of emerging views. Also questions about how recent something has to be an emerging view. These are all important questions and things that sort of spiral of silence theory is really starting to get at, right? So I think you all did a great job in groups of identifying and really thinking about how we might talk about and deal with some of these topics. So if you find yourself interested in conformity and issues related to media coverage and public opinion. This might be a good theory to explore for your essay. So to wrap up for today, we talked about the application paper coming out in 3 weeks, and we'll spend some time this week helping to brainstorm. Talked about spiral of silence in the conformity as perspectives of people we might disagree with, and also how it motivates our individual behavior on topics too. Next class, we'll talk about uses and gratification theory, which again talks about how we play a role in related to media. So go ahead and pass forward or email to me your group activity. Make sure your group member names are on it. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.
Did you get my